Hello, eGPlearners, learners, and welcome to this episode where we're going to basically go through all the big happenings in the past few weeks in terms of general practice. There's been loads of stuff happening whilst we've been taking a temporary break. It always seems to happen, to be honest. Every time I go on holiday, something crazy happens in general practice, and the past couple of weeks has been by no means any exception with that. And in addition to that, myself and Andy have got a fairly big announcement that we're going to come to towards the end of this episode. So I'm afraid you will need to stick with us towards the end. But we've got loads of information to get through beforehand. So let's kick off with the latest primary care news that's been going on over the past few weeks and stuff. And we're starting off with what can only be described as the GPC chaos. Let's be honest. I don't know.
Yeah, GPC meltdown. So,
sorry?
GPC meltdown.
Oh, meltdown. There you go. So Andy's got a better one, the meltdown and stuff. But let's take a look at some of the information we've had. So let me pop it on screen for you, Andy. There we go.
Yeah, so again, you looked at this in more detail, so I'm going to let you talk us through it. But and you're a bit closer to the BMA and the GPC. I know that you have some contacts, in those areas as well. I'm just reacting as a bystander here. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about what's been happening.
Yeah, so just guess for some background and stuff. So obviously Dr. Farrah Jameel was voted in as the GPC chair. Let me get this right. Last year, I think it was 2022. If I remember
2021,
right.
I think.
Yeah. 21. Okay. So, see, my time frame's already off. This is what happens when you go on holiday. You forget everything, don't you? But yeah, voted as GPC chair following on from Dr. Richard Vaultry after he stepped down. And then since then, there's been several things that have happened or we know of that have happened for the GPC. So there was some allegations of bullying put against her. She then went off on maternity leave, and then that process has now kind of paused because she's been on maternity leave. And as a result of that, there's been some elements, I guess, within the profession, the GPC, looking for leadership and where that's coming from. There have been elements of that taken over. So Dr. Kieran Sharrock has taken on as deputy or assistant. I've forgotten the exact terms. It's all in the document in the web link and stuff for you there. But the key thing is that a couple of weeks ago there was a tabled a motion of no confidence in the GPC chair, and that was then subsequently passed at a recent GPC meeting. And I think for the purpose of this episode, the key thing we're going to focus on is the actual motion itself. So, Andy, if you scroll down a little bit, it is actually listed on the Pulse website. So if we can zoom into that blue table that we've got there and stuff, I think that's probably really useful to look at, because a lot of the headlines have been very well publicized, shall we say. But I think understanding some of the terminology and also from my perspective, I guess the key thing I would put is that the GPC, like many massive organizations, are very bureaucratic, let's be honest, and they have motions in terms of reference and that kind of stuff, and this seems to be a process they're going through, right or wrongly. We're not here to make that judgment, but definitely I think there's some information here that's useful. But Andy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just for to zoom out slightly a little bit. So for those people who aren't necessarily familiar with the GPC and so forth, so the General Practice Committee is the part of the BMA that negotiates the GP contract, essentially, or contractual issues with NHS England and the Department of Health. So really, really important body. This is all happening at a time where the last 5-year settlement that ran from, I think, 2018, 2019, and it basically ends next year in 2024, when there will need to be a big review of the GP contract. This is happening at a time when the PCN DES is being reviewed as well. So there's the potential for a big shake-up and a really big round of negotiations needed for that.
Of which a lot of that feeds into our later story about the pay rises as well. So yeah.
So it's a critical time for the GPC. Farrah was, I think, the first female GPC chair, which is quite significant.
And International Medical Graduate GP chair as well.
Yeah, and some of the issues that have been going on, she's been on maternity leave, I think, for some of the time, that some of these kind of allegations and controversy have been sitting there. So it's really, really sort of sticky in terms of, I guess, the GPC feels, it needs to be, absolutely united and, effective in terms of these contract negotiations. But also it's been a very difficult thing, I guess, for them to navigate with the maternity leave and so forth. So I think that's relevant for some of the wording in the in these motions. So take us to the motions, Gandhi.
Yeah, and I guess further backstory, obviously, we know that a few years ago there was this several allegations put against the GPC in terms of the way it managed particular elements of itself, in particular how it viewed women's rights within the GPC as well. So that was all as an outcome of the Romney review that people may remember from a while back. And this hasn't coloured the organisation in a great light when it comes to certain elements of this. And definitely there is a lot of emotion, I think, circulating around the profession around some of the actions that have happened. But the motion itself comes into play. So I'm going to read it out. That this committee is deeply concerned at the lack of clarity surrounding the status of the alleged suspension of the chair of the GPC ahead of significant impending contractual and political upheaval from now through 2024. And so I think that first paragraph summarizes quite a few key things that we've just talked about, probably a lot more succinctly as well, to be honest, Andy. And then it goes into four different parts of the motion. So motion I, or little one, as they like to call it, is sympathetic towards the chair and the difficult circumstances surrounding her absence. So sympathy, that's always good. Little two, applauds the acting chair and the officer team for their commitment, work and leadership during the chair's absence. So this does recognise that there's been a process and individuals taking some of those actions forward in this process. Little three, asserts the proper, effective democratic representation of the profession is paramount importance to the committee. So wanting to abide, obviously, the democratic process, which we all want to adhere to, because that's always important. And these people have been elected into that position, Farrah at the very least, and then obviously the committee around her from elected officials that she's then appointed. And little four, regrets that there's no alternative, but the declare this committee has no confidence in the current elected chair of GPC and demands elections to be held as soon as possible for a new chair and subsequent officer team in accordance with the standing orders. And obviously that's the key part of this. Now, a couple of things that, from my understanding, and again, very clear, not a member of the GPC, by no means a lawyer or anything else and stuff. My understanding is that the only way to have a new chair brought in is to obviously, first of all, put a declaration of no confidence in the current chair. That is the only process they have. And because Farrah is on maternity leave, that is the only process they have available to them in terms of the democracy, bureaucracy, or whatever you want to call it, process to do so. So that's part of the reason why I think there's the declaration of no confidence is put in there. I guess the other part that's worth knowing about is that part in brackets and subsequent officer team in accordance with the standing orders. So when Farrah is no longer chair, which is what the motion was passed, the officer team that she's had elected, so people, Dr. Karen Sherrick, unfortunately, I've forgotten all the other names right now. Not very good. But they would automatically be up for replacement effectively because they were brought in by Farrah herself as part of her kind of team and stuff. So when she is no longer chair, that whole team would also have to change. Obviously, they could be brought back in again. But that same process happened when Dr. Vautry was no longer chair. The entire team changed basically as a result of that. So we would have a newly elected or newly representative team leading forward and stuff. The proposers, Dr. Rachel Ali, important to know, and again, I'm going to get her title wrong probably here, but she's the Equality and Diversity lead for the GPC. And then seconders, there's various members up there. A couple of who I've worked with in the past and have been part of the GPC for many years as well. So a fairly united front in terms of the GPC representative bodies, from what I can understand, in terms of all that information and stuff. But there were a couple of people who were put down as seconders, as you can see there in the document, that then had their names removed because they said that they would retrieve their names in terms of the nomination as well. So there is some elements of that and stuff. But I guess the key thing is that this motion was then voted through the GPC meeting and agreed. So as a result of that, a vote of no confidence has been passed in Dr. Farrah Jameel, and she will no longer be our chair. And there'll be now a new process of election for a new chair of the GPC.
So interesting times, isn't it? Yeah, a few things that struck me about the motion was the first sentence is interesting. The committee is deeply concerned at the lack of clarity surrounding the status of the alleged suspension. So there's something about clarity from maybe HR or other areas of the BMA. It feels like the GPC itself felt there's some regret in it, isn't there? They feel that they perhaps had to do this, but there's some I don't want to use the word swipe, but there's some deeply concerned, some deep concerns about the process, I think, or things that are outside of their control, which is interesting. And then also, as you say, the Equality and Diversity Officer being the proposer is interesting, and because obviously when somebody's off on maternity leave, that's a protected characteristic, isn't it? It's very, very sort of difficult sort of human resource management area, so that feels like a very appropriate person to suggest the motion, or to show that those things are being taken into account. It's always difficult, isn't it, when this is about individuals? It's about quite difficult circumstances, so it's difficult to really comment too deeply on it. I mean, my hope is that the GPC can get some stability, because it's really, really important that the GPC is focus fully on those contract negotiations, and I'm sure the preparatory work will need to be being done now, because they're less than a year away, that we want to be looking at a new contract and to know what the contents are. So I really hope that they get their house in order. And this is probably actions that, ahead of that, so that they have enough runway to work on those negotiations properly. But yeah, any other thoughts, Gandhi?
Well, I guess it's just that. So trying to stay away from the individuals, because I know a fair few of these individuals personally as well, which is really complicating in that sense as well. But I think the key thing from my perspective is that point that you mentioned, that, coming up, we have probably the most significant negotiation for GP contracts coming up for a long time, on a par with the 2007 negotiations that happened when, 2007, 2004, time frames have gone a little bit in terms of when Quaff went and stuff like that. But let's be honest, the profession is really struggling, and we need a united leadership. And let's be honest, we do not have a united leadership, a visible leadership, I think, is the key thing right now. And I suspect, the government is just rolling their hands in glee looking at this. I mean, this looks awful, doesn't it? Horrifically awful.
It does, and I don't know. Trade unions are normally there to support us when we have issues with people we are working for and with, and I don't know. You wonder if there's an angle there that can be potentially exploited by the government in terms of the union not treating its members well, but. It's difficult, and I just hope that this results in the House being in order for the negotiations. Difficult, isn't it? We've had a comment on this.
The other thing that I think I want to comment on is, if you look at some of the editorials that come out around this. So again, Jamie Kaufner from Pulse Today has made an excellent editorial that talks about, actually, is this about the maternity leave, the issue? That actually, would this be an issue if Farrah wasn't on maternity leave? Because they can't really do anything until she comes back from maternity leave, and she is absolutely entitled to have that time. But then, does that mean that chairs can't have maternity? I mean, this is bonkers. This is
I'm not sure I buy that, because you just make sure that you have the right deputy there, to act on behalf of the chair. That shouldn't be the issue, but it certainly makes it all look a lot, murkier, doesn't it? It's difficult. I almost feel uncomfortable talking about these sorts of issues. It's I
think this is part of the challenge, because people feel uncomfortable. General practitioners traditionally hate feeling uncomfortable. Let's be honest, we don't like that. But actually, this is a real situation that's going to have significant impact on the future of general practice, because of the gravity of these negotiations that are due to happen and stuff. And I think when people look back on this, regardless of the individuals at play here, the whole process, to me, as someone with some knowledge of how politics works in general practice, it just feels like a sham. It really does. It feels like there's just stupidity involved in some of this, to be honest.
I mean, the other side of it is, I mean, sometimes when people are facing difficult votes that they don't think they're going to win, they step away and resign from the position first, don't they? And that's something that hasn't happened, and I don't know whether that's something that's not possible when on maternity leave, or if that sometimes that has implications for the optics of other allegations that might be that we know that there are other allegations that are in play here, aren't we? And resigning can sometimes affect the optics of those, so it's difficult. It feels like maybe everybody was just painted into a corner on this one. Yes. Should we take the comments on this Now,
Well,
Gandhi,
there's
before we
been
move
some
on.
interesting comments, definitely.
Yeah.
So we've got Christina basically coming out with a corker of one. GPC situation sounds like an EastEnders plot. Do not disagree with you there, Christina and stuff. And Joseph Pitstrick, too many, apologies if I pronounce that wrong, too many political ploys, not enough genuine care concern for staff, patients in general practice. Absolutely agree with that. I think there's, huge elements of individualist aspects at play here and stuff. But also, to me, this is about what's best for the future of the profession. And I think people are trying to figure out the best way forward. But the bureaucracy is having an impact, to be honest. And whether there's an element of other aspects in terms of politics going on in the background, who knows? But the transparency, I think, is the big thing for me. It talked about it in that first part of the emotion, the alleged suspension of the GPC chair. Has she been suspended?
Lack of clarity. That's what the motion says.
Yeah. Well, what does that even mean? And Christina coming back with, doesn't this show that the GPC doesn't have the sufficient resilience? This is far more important than one individual. Agree. Although interestingly, Christina apparently, Andy, is proposing me and you for joint chairs of the FPC, but I'm assuming she means GPC. Just to be clear, me and Andy have no intention.
No, thank you.
No. We are staying well away. We are more than happy to comment on the politics. We are not going to be involved in the politics itself.
Because that's easy, right? Isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day,
absolutely,
it's important to
calling
comment.
from the back bench is so much easier than being in the front bench.
I've got a lot of sympathy for the people actually trying to make all of this happen. Yeah. So yes, that was really interesting story. It's interesting how uncomfortable we all felt. Discussing that actually, Gandhi, feels very thorny.
I know several of the people involved in this. I must admit, talking about it publicly is not easy, and I can't imagine how all those individuals are feeling in terms of having to navigate the situation publicly and stuff. But at the same time, I'm going to comment that for the benefit of the profession, this is a process that just needs to crack on with, because actually the bigger issue is the stability of the profession. And that should always be, in my mind, the more important thing right now, given the gravity of the situation that's coming our way and stuff. But again, very easy to call from the sidelines on this one, rather than being in the midst of it and stuff and things. So, yeah, so next we're talking about the GP recruitment. So Andy, you're going to lead us on this one, aren't you?
Yeah, so I selected this story, and I think we can be quite negative on the show, because often things are not going well. It feels like things haven't been going well for general practice for the last few years. No. But this is a somewhat positive story, really. So it's coming from government comments. This is a story in the Pulse, with the government hailing another strong year for GP recruitment. But actually, there is a high fill rate for GP training schemes. A few years ago, training schemes were really struggling to fill their places. That's different now. There are more places than there used to be. And they are being filled. And they're also signalling within this article in the government announcement, they're name dropping the NHS workforce plan, which we talked about, 1 or 2 weeks ago. There's a big long video about that. People can check that out. But GP training, but GP training places GP training places are projected, and there is a plan and a commitment to increase those from about, I think, just over 3,000 at the moment, 3,400, I think, to 6,000. From 4,000 to 6,000, an increase of 50% by 2030s, by 2031, which is really, really positive. And they also talk about some schemes that have been there to encourage the recruitment of GPs to difficult to recruit to areas, some of those golden handshake schemes that have been around for a few years. So, actually they're painting a picture of a recruitment situation that actually probably does look better, in terms of the pipeline training than a few years ago, and is projected with a commitment to get better over time, and the difficulties in general practice won't resolve overnight. We stand here and we say, it takes, 10 years to train a GP. There is no quick fixes, is what we've said, and actually there is some commitment to a longer fix here. So provided they stick to the plan, provided it works, provided the next government doesn't go in a different direction. So that was a potentially a somewhat positive story. I don't know if people out there feel positive seeing these sorts of stories, if they believe it. I don't know. What do you think, Andy?
Well, I'd like more detail, if I'm being absolutely honest, because in terms of the government saying that there's an increase in numbers, well, okay, so they've increased the number of places, so there's going to be an increase in the number of people doing the training and stuff. We have seen, obviously, really negative elements of hospital-based medicine going on right now, so people shifting from secondary care to primary care was, to be honest, a little bit anticipated, and it's always held up that obviously GP training has the shortest training scheme of any speciality, so that's always been seen as a particular carrot for general practice training for certain individuals when they, they've completed their medical degrees and that kind of stuff, which, I disagree with. The reality, general practice is probably one of the hardest professions in medicine, equivocal to that working in A&E departments and stuff. And despite the length of training and the intensity is a separate matter. And obviously when you come out of it, you're a completely independent practitioner compared to a lot of the other specialities where you're still encased within the hospital-based system, support mechanisms, and various other aspects and things. The one piece of interesting data I haven't seen, and I don't know if it's held within that and stuff, and that's purely because we've not gone out looking for it, it is actually the number of those places that are filled by international medical graduates.
Well, that was something I was going to comment on, actually, because I think locally we're looking at 2/3 of those places filled by international medical graduates, which is interesting. So there's a lot of people coming from overseas to fill those training places, which is not a bad thing in itself.
No, not at all.
But I think the government sort of talks the talk of wanting more homegrown health professionals, and that's not what's happening right now. Although, of course, there is a plan to double the number of medical student places as part of the NHS workforce plan. So again, there's no quick fix for that, but the longer fix has been announced.
I guess one thing I will raise on that, though, as a GP trainer, in terms of supporting international medical graduates going through the GP training scheme, there's that added element of challenge that they have to deal with, because many of them are having to understand not only how to do general practice, but actually understanding how to work within the NHS as well, which is a complicated culture to adopt if you're not used to understanding it. And let's be honest, we have many people who are, British born and still don't understand how the NHS works and stuff and things. And that causes added complexity. And actually, there is an element of people training within general practice because it is the shortest training scheme to get CCT and then leaving to go away afterwards and stuff. And that doesn't actually lead to outcomes of GPs staying, which actually, despite all of this, we all know that the number of GPs is dropping year on year in terms of wholly qualified and stuff and things. So I think, having a better understanding of the data, how many people not only coming and training within the schemes and stuff, but also staying is a really important metric from my perspective. And I know that probably paints me not in a great light, but having, supported people through the training scheme, mentored them, trained them and stuff, and then they want to leave is quite discerning, to be honest, at times. It's not the greatest feeling in the world. And it just makes you wonder whether the headline, which is this positive element. So, Andy, I know you said, yay, positive story.
Well, I'm trying this morning to be positive. Yeah, and we were positive for a brief while. Yeah, no, I take on board, exactly what you're saying. And I think this speaks to a longer fix, but I think unfortunately the government may be wanting, a short-term headline for longer-term fix, which might make people think that it's fixed already, which it's not. I just think with international graduates, there's that just not just the NHS culture, but there's just the UK culture, isn't it? If you're coming from a different part of the world, actually, having consultations with people from the UK, just in terms of language and tradition and how things operate, really, really difficult. So I've got a lot of sympathy and respect for people who move across the world to train in another country. You've got to take your hats off to that.
Absolutely. Taking the initiative and coming to another country to train, to learn, and to do things is an immense challenge. I mean, it's one of the things we talk about quite often in GP5T when we've created our conference for supporting GP trainers to help them understand the complexities of training individuals and stuff. And that's one of the things that comes up so many times in the discussions within the topics, that kind of stuff, is supporting these trainees as well. So again, just to mention, if people do want to jump in and join us on Saturday the 9th of September is our next conference, GP5T6, which is talking about the future. absolute focus on things like the new SCA exam, which is going to be really interesting. I'm really happy that's coming in, which I know some people are going to be questioning that, but compared to the RCI, I think it's going to be an upstep in the examination process, particularly for those IMG trainees and stuff. But yeah, if people do want to jump and enjoy, the links to that will be down below in the show notes and stuff. I would love to put it on screen right now, but I can't find it right now. And jump in and join myself and Andy as we coordinate that conference for GP trainers and stuff, because actually we're already filling up fairly quickly. But I know Dave's put in some comments already, seeing far more numbers of IMGs on training schemes, insufficient training practices, and we are struggling with this locally. And then he mentions about retention of numbers to reverse the trends for less GPs is very important. Exactly that, Gandhi. And again, Christina jumping in, re-medical students, government only interested in reporting increase in training numbers, not reducing number of fully qualified GPs. Yeah, it seems to be more about recruitment, less about retention. We've mentioned that.
Yeah, well, that's where the positive spin is, isn't it, for the government, I guess. So that's where they're going to focus their talking. But people have read our minds in terms of what story we've selected next, because GPs are warning of intense workloads and a workforce crisis as the number of full-time equivalent GPs continues to fall. So we just wanted to balance the last article with a little bit of a dose of reality that actually, while in the longer term there are plans to improve the situation, actually in the shorter term things continue to worsen in terms of these metrics. So interesting article, links out to a few data sources actually. So they talk about the numbers of appointments in general practice. I'm going to use our magnifying glass here. So 2021, you got about 24 million appointments in general practice being delivered in 2021. So we're kind of well in the middle of, vaccination, COVID vaccinations happening and so forth. This is active throughout this period. And then we're up to 29 million just last month in June 2023. So the numbers of appointments are increasing, whilst the numbers of full-time equivalent, and actually it is there. You can go to to NHS data sources and get information about full-time equivalent GP numbers. It's not a secret. The government is aware of them and publishes them on the website. But those are going down, and I think the numbers here are that I think we've lost about 1,900 something full-time equivalent GPs since 2019. So it's been a slow decline or rapid decline. There's been a decline of around 900 GPs over that period of time. So so difficult times. And so this is just people from within the profession just highlighting this. I think Camilla Hawthorne is from RCGP, is the one who's made these comments that have been picked up on by Pulse. So just balancing and giving that full picture around GP numbers. Yeah, you might hear in the papers that the training numbers are going up, but actually in the short term, full-time equivalent GPs are going down. Number of appointments in general practice are going up. I guess some of those appointments will be being delivered by people who are not GPs. Probably increase in, I think, would be maybe beginning to see some of the primary care network ARS staff appearing there, such as our pharmacists, physicians associates operating in GP practice. But of course, they need supervision from GPs. Still more work there for the GPs that remain. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Gandhi?
I mean, what more can we say? We know GPs are leaving left, right, and centre. I think important thing to recognise about the appointment data as well. It comments 29.7 million or whatever. We also know that number is massively underestimated because of the idiosyncrasies of the systems and the way that they report the data. So because they have to be logged on the appointment book, actually, we know that the complexity of doing that is really hard to do so. For particularly ad hoc appointments, just sticking on that you've seen an extra patient in your clinic is not as simple as just adding an appointment on the book. You have to change the templates, you have to change the slots, all this kind of stuff. It's so complicated that most people don't do it, let's be honest. And we know that the GPAD reporting, I've commented on this numerous times, is woefully inadequate in terms of a mechanism for capturing the amount of workload. And let's not forget, they don't report on the non-clinical work the general practice does. They talk about appointments because that's what they love to do, because that's sexy and that's what the government wants to hear and that's what the public wants to hear. But what you never hear about is all the additional extra work that goes on in the background that's not reported on because they don't want to capture. Well, they capture it, they have that information, but they don't report on it. And that's a travesty in my view. But actually, that's important to be aware of because that shows how busy general practice is. So even though it says 29.7 million appointments, let's be clear, general practice does crap loads more than that, but it's not commented on.
Yeah, I think you've answered Joseph's questions there, really. He was just questioning the validity of the data and how it's calculated. I think you've given a good explanation of that. I think another factor here is that actually the quality of reporting and capture of GP appointments is probably improving as time goes on. So you might even say, actually, have 5 million more appointments taken place, or is it just that we've got better at capturing and counting those? I mean, because it's very difficult to compare what GPAD data or what data was like in 2019, compared to 2023. So yeah, lots of holes
since
all over the data.
2021, GPAD's been a required part of the contract. So actually, the data we're now seeing should be better. It's not going to be perfect, but many practices went through a process of aligning that. So with the tools that we have, it's probably as good as it's ever going to be, allowing for the fact some practices are always going to struggle and some people are never going to do it right anyway.
Yeah.
But the whole point is the methodology of it and the way that it's captured, again, it's inadequate, it's inaccurate, but it's the best I will put that to them. It's the best they've got with the tools that we have. The only way to change that is to have new tools.
No, and to be honest, we spent a long time saying, they're not measuring activity, in general practice at all, or correct. So this is an improvement, and I think we'll probably get to a place where the data is useful in the future. The point I was making was that I think we've got better as a practice at capturing our activity data on GPAD since 2021. So, even if I think we do more appointments, but even if we didn't, our data probably would look better because we're just better at capturing it. There'll be a point where we're capturing it adequately and you will be able to compare data going forwards over time for mine and other practices.
We will see. But I guess just to comment from Joseph, so there's disparity in every practice on an administrative basis. It's difficult to capture this accurately, correct, although it is captured if you follow GPAD appropriately and put those slots into it, but it's really difficult to do, just like with the appointments. And again, NHS England don't report on that. They actively state they will not report on that data. I wonder why. And as he correctly says, love it or hate it, it's here to stay for now. So this is the best what we've got currently and stuff. Okay, so we talked about appointments. Let's talk about something even more controversial, shall we? Money.
Let's talk about pay. Yeah.
Pay rises in primary care. So big news story, obviously, the other week by Rishi Sunak himself. So it wasn't Steve Barclay that made this announcement. It was Rishi Sunak himself, our Prime Minister, talking about pay rises for the NHS, including obviously GPs and GP trainees. 6% pay rises across the board for the entire NHS. So nurses, consultants, not nurses, hospital doctors, consultants, junior doctors, GP trainees, GPs, as in salary GPs, not GP partners. What do you think, Andy?
Not GP contractors, which I mean that's GP partners essentially, but that's I think how it was worded in the announcement. I don't know what to think about this. It's difficult to know whether the amount's appropriate, isn't it? I mean, I don't think it's sufficient to match the increases of inflation that we've seen over the past few years. The rise in cost of living, the need to attract people into these professions and these jobs. It's difficult working in healthcare. It's difficult being a GP receptionist when you can earn, the same money or more working at the supermarket for less responsibility. Probably a less interesting job, less interesting role, and some people actually want to make the difference that working in a GP surgery makes, actually. So there is more going for the job than the pay. But if you're just looking at the pay, it's difficult, and I'm not sure that this is sufficient to keep competitive. Although on the other hand, it might be more than we might have thought. People would get. Looking at last year's recommendations from the Doctors and Dentists Pay Review Body, for example. What were your first thoughts, Gandhi, on this one?
So it was interesting. So firstly, and I mentioned this earlier, Rishi Sunak made this announcement, not Steve Barclay. So it wasn't the Secretary of State for Health, it was the Prime Minister himself who made this announcement. And I think there was something about him having the gravitas to say, this is where we're at, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. They have been clear, this is not going to be from additional taxation. They're really keen to push that message. They're not going to tax the public even more in order to finance this. And the money will be taken from elsewhere in the healthcare systems. So it does mean they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, effectively. So those monies will be made from efficiency savings, but again, the NHS has made numerous efficiency savings over the past few years. You kind of wonder how much more efficiency savings can be made. And let's be honest, it's not really efficient right now. So that raises even more questions in that. But also there's this aspect of where is the funding actually going to go to? I think obviously for me and Andy, we're going to put a bit of declaration here, both as GP partners or contractors, as the document states. It is quite clear that there's not going to be any additional pay awarded to GP contractors. This is just for the salary doctors and for the GP trainees, and that funding will come to the GP practice in some way, but the absolute clarity and the amount and stuff hasn't been made clear, because it suggests it's coming through the global sum, which is how practices are paid. But then how are they going to allocate that appropriately? Because how do they know how much we're paying our staff? Because they don't know that. Let's be honest. They don't know how much we pay our staff. So, how is that going to be allocated in terms of the funding elements and stuff? That's the part that, again, devil in the detail. There's no detail. There's no information about how this is going to work and stuff. Added in that is obviously the push that for GP nurses and other healthcare professionals to have a 6% pay rise now as well because of this announcement. Again, that's not included in the funding amounts. We don't have any detail as to how that money is going to come to GP practices. And they are crystal clear they're not going to increase the amount of funding that we have for general practice contractors because of the fact we're under this 5-year deal, which is what we alluded to earlier when we talked about the negotiation aspects of stuff. In the sense that the PCN DES contract, the GP contract is not going to be uplifted because that's set 2.1% each year, which is far below the 6% that they're suggesting needs to happen. And obviously, like Andy mentioned, if you subsequently compound that for inflation with all the other cost increase and stuff, it again means that many practices are going in the red. And let's be honest, more and more practices are closing because of this. And it raises the question as to how stability in general practice is going to continue.
There's
loads of things in there.
That's the alternative headline here. Yeah, I think we've given a good outline there. I guess the other thing is people are beginning to ask the question, please confirm that this is recurrent funding for the pay rise. Yeah. I guess they haven't been clear about how it's being paid, or, so they haven't been clear about whether or not it's recurrent. I mean, when I first read this, it must be recurrent, to pay for a 6% increase in pay, because pay is a recurrent cost. But people are so distrustful, I guess, of these government announcements and manoeuvres that we feel we need confirmation that that's recurrent. And I'd like to see that confirmation, actually.
Yeah. Going to stick my favourite slogan in there. Sound bites, not substance, in my view. That's all it is.
Yeah. So interesting. And then the final story for today is just we've had Opal reporting in Nottingham for some time, haven't we? Which is this sort of operational pressures and escalation levels reporting. Been in place in hospitals for a long time, and it sort of reports on their readiness and ability to to deliver care and yep. do their job, basically. So it can be a combination of demands and staffing levels. Essentially, that means that something can be red, amber, green. There's lots of different ways that it has been done in the past, but I think Opal works on a red, amber, sort of green, black, sort of yep. reporting system. But anyway, it's going to be made compulsory or mandatory for ICBs to put this in place for general practice across the country, essentially. And I guess, and it goes on to say this will be part of, winter planning documents that are published, which I think we'll probably do another episode on, actually, because it'd be interesting to go into a bit more detail about the general practice component of that. This feels like something that would be welcome. Have you got any initial reaction to this, Gandhi?
So like you say, Nottingham, where we work, has been doing Opal reporting for a while. I guess interestingly, we've not had a structured description necessarily of how to do Opal reporting. I think they have tried to re-clarify that more recently. That compares to, I guess, other places like the Devon LMCs, which have been doing Opal reporting in a slightly different way. They call it GPairs. I can't remember what it stands for. But they use a slightly more specific metric-based system to try and analyze how that works and stuff. And I think that's part of the challenge there, because every practice is so individual in its makeup and its constructs and that kind of stuff. Having an outcomes-based or a KPI-based Opal reporting system for the general practice is actually a really big challenge. It's not as simple as it sounds, because do you go based on that when you've got 10% of your staffing? Do you go that based on when you've got 50% of your staffing? How do you do that based on your appointments? What is the trigger? Because sometimes it can be down to individuals being off, not necessarily roles being off as well. So if you're practice managers then suddenly off for a couple of months, that's a massive issue compared to potentially, one of your nurses, and that may be the complete opposite way around. It could be, your nurse being off and your chronic disease care going to pot because of the result of it. So I think there are different challenges. Measuring demand's a real challenge for general practice. It's always been an issue, and obviously there's elements and pushes to being made to tackle that. So there's things like cloud-based telephony, whether that will give us the metrics to help us understand demand a bit more effectively, and therefore feed into some of this Opal reporting, which I assume is what NHS England are looking at with the cloud-based telephony aspects of things and stuff. But I think having a system to recognise when general practice is at breaking point is important. Interestingly, some of the data that says out there, most practice already reporting as red and black already, which doesn't put you in good light when it comes to winter. I know numerous times my practice has been red, and a couple of times we've been black locally, and that can be, the most common one actually is IT failure. That's the most common reason for a practice declaring itself black, because you've suddenly lost access to any form of patient data, and therefore you really can't do a great job if you can't access your patient data and stuff. So various things like that have an impact and stuff. So I think it's definitely a good thing to do. Having more formalized would be sensible, and really keen to see some of the Dev and LMC stuff that they've been using. So they've been using that as a model to share across, and I think quite a few LMCs are sharing that kind of model across themselves as a recognized method and stuff. And if the Dev and LMC want to come in and talk to us about it, let me know. More than happy to have you on the show and stuff to talk about it as well in more detail. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think.
It's going to be interesting. And the question I have is and then what? Because it's all well and good knowing or categorizing the level of pressure that a practice might be under, but then what happens when they're when they are black, or red? What support happens? How does the system accommodate the fact that practice is struggling? What systems will we put in place to mitigate these things? And if people are reporting black all the time, what does that tell you about the system and how it's structured and how it's funded? So I would ask, actually, what will be the short-term response when practices are declaring difficulties on Opal or found to be in difficulties? And actually, if this exposes some underlying sort of vulnerabilities and fragilities in general practice cover across the country or in certain areas, what's going to be the kind of systemic medium to long-term response to that? But I guess we have to put the system in place, we have to collect the data, and and then I guess we'll find those solutions. At least we're taking the first steps.
And I agree with you. That's one of the challenges. So I remember when I declared our practice black because we'd had mass sickness throughout the whole practice, and basically I was the only GP in practice with one of my salary doctors, and I told them that, well, we just don't have the capacity to provide appointments. We're black. We're shutting the practice effectively. I got a phone call back from the ICB saying, well, what are you going to do about it? And I was like, what do you want me to do about it? I can't find staff. There's no locums. We literally called everyone around. I'd already informed our network. So the first response you always get is ask your PCN to help you. I've already done that, to be honest.
What does your business continuity plan say? I think that's the sort of thing that they...
So our business continuity plan is effectively to inform the ICB, to redirect patients to other places for their safety, and to announce that we have no capacity. And that's about it, because we can't suddenly transfer all of our care to another practice. That doesn't work. It's not sensible, and there's no capacity within the system to. So we do have some things we put in place since then. So, for example, we're developing an acute hub. Again, those appointments are gone by 8:30. Let's be honest, there's just a capacity issue in general practice. It's just not going to go away instantly. So often the challenge is, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm like, well, what are you going to do to help me? I can't fix this. And often the answer is, well, just put your DDoS notifications up and stuff, and tell us when you're fixed.
Yeah, I think next year there'll be a drive for PCNs to produce plans for how they will respond when practices declare high levels of strain on Opal. Watch this space.
Already done it, Andy.
There's a prediction.
True.
Yeah. It'll be down to us to decide what the
It
response
will.
is.
As ever, it ends up on general practice's shoulders to fix general practice, unfortunately.
So Gandhi, there's a big announcement, and there was a worrying thumbnail for this episode. So people have been sort of sat there wondering what's going on. So so Gandhi, what's happening?
So a bit of an announcement for everybody, and thank you for joining us live if you are watching this with us as well. But basically, we're making a significant change to eGPlearning, and that is that we will be stopping doing these Saturday lives. The reason for that is simply that we're shifting the time. So we're going to be moving towards Thursday evenings to do the live work. That's mainly because life is getting a bit more chaotic, a little bit more challenging, and actually we want to also provide a better service. And we recognise that more people seem to be watching the channel in the evenings on the weekdays as well. So to increase the amount of availability of this information has to everybody, as well as giving us the headspace time to do more of this stuff, we're going to be moving this to a Thursday afternoon. Typically, it's either going to be 7 or 7:30. We haven't quite figured out the time yet, but we're still here, so not to worry about that. We're not going anywhere away permanently, but we are shifting the time of these lives. So one of the comments we often get is that people can't join us live and they would like to. So as a result of that, we are going to be moving towards Thursday evenings. So next week's episode is going to be a pre-record. So coming Thursday, and that's going to be coming Thursday we're going live, isn't it, Andy?
Yes, that's what we said. Yep.
No, coming Thursday we're going live, so our first one, and then following that we'll have a pre-record episode and then a live, similar format to what we've been doing for the past few years. Weirdly, Andy. So we reflected on this. Me and Andy have actually been doing this now for about consistently. We've been doing this for the past 3-4 years, ever since COVID kicked off and stuff. But even before that, obviously, this channel's been going on for 5 years. We've got over 600 videos on the channel. Can you believe
wow.
600 videos. But yeah, effectively, the big thing that we are done with, we are not going to be going live on Saturday mornings anymore. It will be shifting to Thursday evenings. We're still going to be here to help respond to everything that's going on. We are looking at those episodes being a little bit tighter, a little bit shorter. Obviously, we're still going to do our deep dives of the documents as they come out and stuff. And you never know, we may end up doing a surprise Saturday episode and stuff just to keep you all on your toes and stuff, just to keep things happy and stuff. But yeah, we are going to be around. Obviously, if you can't join us live on the Thursday afternoons, which I appreciate, those of you joining us Saturday mornings maybe saying, no, don't worry, it's all going to be available obviously on the replay and stuff on YouTube and things. But we hope this means that it'll be more conducive to more of you joining us live when we're going, so you can engage and interact with some of this stuff more effectively, and hopefully that will help provide a better information service, because actually we love this interaction that we get from all of you and stuff, and definitely seeing that coming through in the comments and stuff. So lovely little thumbs up from Carl. Dave, glad you'll be continuing. We'll hopefully be able to manage to join, but not always. Thursday evenings already taken up. Absolutely recognize that the people are busy on Thursday evenings, and obviously there's also the whole aspect of bedtimes with kids and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's part of the reason why, to be honest, we're shifting this as well. Family life means that I need to be a little bit more available on Saturdays. I know Andy's got some other things planned as well. So we are shifting it for both our sanity, but also to help you more effectively out there in general practice and stuff. And thank you, JC, as ever, massive supporter of the channel and stuff. So thank you for the comments as well. Any thoughts on that, Andy?
No, it's good. I'm looking forward to the change, actually. I hope we can bring some of the audience with us. And it might be that there's a kind of a different audience that needs to build a little bit as well when we do Thursdays. And sort of looking forward to maybe trying to make some of the episodes a little bit tighter time-wise. And I think we'll have a bit more pressure on us, I think, on a Thursday, which will help us do that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's good.
And I guess you're probably wondering what's coming up. Well, just in terms of that, so actually the big thing that came out this week was the GP survey. And me and Andy...
I'm going to do it, Gandhi. You hate it when I use the Daily Mail as an example. But yeah, it's that time of the year, isn't it, where those articles start coming out now. The best and the worst GP practice in the country, in your area, in your local press. And that's because the GP survey comes out in July every year. And it's recently been published. So we've got a recorded episode coming up looking at the state of the GP survey 2023. Gandhi, I've got a question for you. I'm just looking at the adverts here. Barbie or Oppenheimer, or are you doing the Barbenheimer, double header at the cinema?
So I've done neither. I'm kind of avoiding both, and they're not my wheelhouse films, to be honest, either of them. So Barbie, my daughter doesn't want to see it, so that's fine. Oppenheimer, 3 hours.
It's too long, isn't it? I'm doing Mission Impossible instead, I think. Apparently
My
that's
wife
right.
would much rather see Mission Impossible, so that will probably be the one we end up seeing and stuff. But if you do want to watch that episode on the GP survey and stuff, it's going to be coming up probably right about here, right now. If we've already recorded it and played it and stuff, which will be coming up on I want to say the 10th of August. Remember, Thursday the 3rd, we'll be going live talking about more stuff. We've got some interesting things coming for you then. And as always, we're going to be here to help tech enhance your primary care and learning.